So get this book. All of the links are going to be below. So CPTSD, Pete Walker from Surviving to Thriving, who I've had the pleasure of 3 conversations with him over the last year. I got in contact with him and asked if it was okay for me to read bits of his book and post, information about CPTSD. Right, so here we go. So this is chapter 3, which may not apply to everybody depending on what level we're at within the CPTSD, complex PTSD. PTSD itself CPTSD is a more serious form of PTSD, meaning that PTSD tends to be a one-off event that's very shocking to the system, and CPTSD is where an event's gone on and on and on, and and it affects people really badly. And I'm going to read now. It's about improving relationships, and there's a forewarning here which I'm going to read. He says there are incidences of parental betrayal so extreme that it is not fair or reasonable to expect the survivor to try to trust human beings again. If the recommendation in this chapter is chapter 2 open to the help of others, feel free and moving on. Like if it's too overwhelming, this chapter, then, he says, move on to the next chapter. He said there's a great deal of other source material in the book that will help alleviate the many symptoms of CPTSD. And since recovery is relative and never complete, you do not need to implement everything in this book. And he says, as they would say in a 12-step movement, take the best and leave the rest. So we don't have to do everything. We just need the knowledge, and then we figure out who we are. We're individuals where, we've got to figure out what is right for us. Some people would say that forgiveness is the key to healing CPTSD, but I can tell you it really depends on the type of trauma you've had, and processing is needed, and a lot of grieving and healthy blame and healthy anger and conscious grieving, because if we don't, if we're grieving but we're not consciously knowing that that's what's going on, then it's like we're not really going to understand it and we're not going to evolve. So we need to get to the point where we're understanding that our healing is it's a conscious choice. I'm going to heal this stuff. I'm going to heal this so that I can have a better life, instead of being stuck in the worst end of it, of, which I was for some time, which is you're healing, but you don't know that you're, that's what's going on. Yes, June, I agree with you. For particularly in many, many cases, it's not a light switch that we turn on and off. It's a situation of, processing and then being okay, learning to be okay within ourselves and having good people around us and other things. It's not about forgiving people that have carried out heinous abuse and stolen a childhood, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is he talks here about CPTSD as an attachment disorder. He says many therapists see CPTSD as an attachment disorder. This means that as a child, the survivor grew up without a safe adult to healthily bond with. As bears repeating, CPTSD almost always has emotional neglect at its core. So what he's saying is that CPTSD means that generally people have been emotionally neglected. A key outcome of this is that the child has no one in his formative years, or her in the formative years, who models the relational skills that are necessary to create intimacy. When the development need to practice healthy relating with a caretaker is unmet, survivors typically struggle to find and maintain healthy, supportive relationships in their adult lives. And I can see that myself, where I sort of would not interact with people. I used to sit on my own and, work very hard and then sit on my own with a bottle of wine at night and a pack of cigarettes, because quite frankly, I just didn't want to be out in the world and I didn't really trust anybody. But now I've come out of myself, I've done the worst of my healing. And, I'm doing workshops in London, and I'm speaking up and helping other people, and I'm being on YouTube and being very active. But for years, I'd literally just want to hide away from people, and I would disassociate using wine. That's what I used to do. So he says here, the origin of social anxiety, a child who grows up with no reliable human source of love, support and protection typically falls into a great deal of social unease. He naturally or she naturally becomes reluctant to seek support from anyone, and he or she is forced to adopt self-sufficiency as a survival tactic. And I did that. I was very, very extreme self-sufficient, like wouldn't go to anybody for anything. He goes on to say, needing anything from others can feel especially dangerous. The survivor's innate capacity to experience comfort and support in relationship becomes very limited or non-existent. This is despite the fact they are high functioning survivors, learn to socially function quite adequately. So that was page 50, 51. Okay, so what does Ramban say? CPTSD is really just another word for psychoneurosis in general, not really a distinct condition in itself. Yeah, I think the only thing it does point to is that generally it's going to be trauma that's gone on and on and on. So it's where abuse has been carried out. You know, we can see this currently with where people are being trafficked or sexual abuse, any abuse in childhood, like where you have something called arrested development, Ronfano. So you have something that's called arrested development. So it means that as a child, if abuse has been carried out in childhood, there's parts of your development that are going to be turned off. If you've not had, abuse in childhood, then it's a whole different matter. You're literally in a position where you do know how to say no, you do know how to stand up for yourself. And, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse is going to be very damaging to a child. So CPTSD really is clarifying, I think, as Pete Walker in the book. I don't know if you've read it, Ronfano. I'm looking at your message there. I don't know if you've looked at the book of Pete Walker. But anyway, it's free actually on Audible USA and free on Kindle UK. Going on, social anxiety. So he says, this is particularly the case in structural situations where expectations are clear and common goals often take focus off conversing and put it on task accomplishments. Make sure I've got the right page. Unstructured social situations, however, like attending parties or just hanging out, can be considerably more triggering. Spontaneous self-expression feels like the same setup for disaster that it was in childhood. So if you don't feel safe as a child in your own family, then as an adult, you're not going to feel particularly safe in situations. Like it may just feel very unsafe. Either way, structured or spontaneous relating often involves hiding a great deal of anxiety and discomfort. One very successful businessman client of mine told me, I'm so cool, calm and collected in meetings, a veritable wordsmith with the composure of Michael Caine. I'm a king on the outside, but on the inside I am a drama queen, anguishing in doubt and shame about everything I say or do. And I can relate to that. I felt a lot of shame, like, that there was something wrong with me, and that, that I was faulty goods and that I wasn't good enough and that my value was less than other people's for years. And I don't feel that anymore. I've had to do a lot of work on that. And when I catch myself thinking that, others are more important than me, I catch myself really quickly and stop myself. He says, in worst case scenarios, social anxiety can devolve into social phobias, especially during prolonged flashbacks. Extensive childhood abuse installs a powerful people are dangerous program. When I was at my least recovered, I couldn't take out the garbage. He's saying he couldn't take out the garbage when I was in a flashback. I feared that my neighbor, my sweet, always affirming neighbor, would look out the window and see how wretched and pitiful I was. Even worse, I dreaded the prospect that she might come out and want to interact with me. Nonetheless, I socialized for decades when necessary and seemed to be doing it with a considerable amount of success, no matter how dreadful the reviews were from my inner critic or my critic. I even eventually came to see, when not in a flashback, that a lot of people really liked me. So, you know, it really messes up the head. It really can be, you know, you can feel really sort of like you're just not right, that there's something wrong with you. He says here, unfortunately, however, I rarely derived any satisfaction or comfort from this perception, because underneath my smooth persona, I was writhing in discomfort and typically measuring the time I could least obtrusively make my escape. So I used to do that. I used to go to, you know, maybe meetings or something, and I just couldn't wait to get away from people, just to be on my own. And again, you know, I'm a lot easier on myself now. I find it a lot easier to be around people. And then the next bit is a journey of relational healing. He says, the incident I am about to describe marked a huge step in my long, gradual journey of opening up to real intimacy. I was sitting, he says, I was sitting on my porch with my dog, George, the only being I could truly relax with, when he broke his lead and sprinted across the street in pursuit of a cat. Before he could get to the cat, he was run over by a car. Both axles run over. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me in my adult life. And when the shock, which is disassociation, wore off, I was drowning in the abandonment melange. So that means that, you know, when he basically really suffered. He says, beyond devastated, I felt panicky and catatonic at the same time, as he did in childhood. When feeling overwhelmed, I hid in my room for 36 hours. So he used to hide in his room away from his parents, dreading contact with my fair weather, or what he says, in a room, not his parents, not in the house, dreading contact with my fair weather friend roommates. I was 28 and still thoroughly phobic about showing any vulnerability. All my relationships had been developed under my guise of people pleasing, funny guy persona, and in my current state, there was not a joke anywhere to be found. There was no way I could let myself be seen, because it felt like I was repulsive, he says. I could not sleep, and as sleep deprivation deteriorated into fear that I was really truly going crazy, out of nowhere came the amazing grace. He says amazing grace came forward. Let me just move something here. Completed. I'm being bothered by my calendar for some reason. Ronfano says it needn't have its origin in overt abuse, though the overwhelming distant father parental dynamic in particular has been known to cause, yes, such systems. Yes, I think it's useful for people to be able to call it something, though, Ronfano. Maybe, you know, it's like to be able to relate. And this book is on CPTSD, so I guess, and I'm telling people to get the book as well. So CPTSD, wherever it came from, it's just a way of describing, you know, what goes on in a particular situation. But I do get you. So he says, grace disguised in a form I usually abhorred was the grace of deep surrender into weeping. So when he lost that dog, what he's saying is that was, you know, the love of his life, his dog. When he lost his dog, he went into a deep surrender into weeping, a long sobbing release, more soothing than anything I had ever experienced before. It was the release I describe in chapter 2 and extensively throughout my first book. When the tears were cried out, I knew I would be okay, and I knew I was not going crazy. I could face my roommates with the realist, perhaps for the first time, and he began to get his self-esteem that he had never known. And from that point on, I knew I wanted more of these incredibly healing tears. So I went through a couple of years, you know, where I did allow myself to, you know, the tears and the anger, the healthy anger, or the anger that I'd been treated so badly, and then the healthy anger, healthy blame, and healthy tears. And that's normal. It's like we have to understand that, you know, just to shut ourselves down and think that we have to forgive what's not been processed is just chronically bad. And unfortunately, a lot of spiritual groups will be suggestive towards this, and, you know, and also religious practices will just suggest that, you know, you've had heinous abuse and all you've got to do is forgive and then you're going to live happily ever after. Well, that is not the case, because people who've got CPTSD will be triggered. They have, you know, there's so much that needs to be sorted out. And, you know, I've seen that I've needed a lot of love as well, and I've got friends that really care about me. So it's not just one thing that's going to solve the problem. And I'm going to read a bit more. He says, healing the shame that binds us in loneliness. So I did suffer a lot of loneliness because I didn't think anybody would ever understand me. I couldn't explain to people what happened to me because I felt so much shame, and I felt guilt that I couldn't be forgiving of the people that really hurt me as well. So it's a real it messes with your head, you know. So it's really unfortunate that you can go through severe childhood trauma and live out your adult life, you know, trying to, you know, as I did with drinking wine, trying to cover up the pain. And it's, you know, making money, doing my business, and really suffering. You know, life was not good. But the minute I started, a couple of years ago, I started purging. Somebody was really offensive to me, and it sort of sent me into a breakdown. And from that, I began to speak up, and I began to, you know, heal that original core wounding. And now when I have flashbacks, I get them really rarely now, but when I get them, I'm in them for a very short space of time. What you'll see below this video as well, you'll see the 13 steps for managing flashbacks. Really important that you print that list off and maybe put it in your bag or your wallet on an A4 piece of paper. And it will remind you of how to take care of yourself when you go into triggers or flashbacks. But the first thing that's going to happen when we start the CPTSD work, before anything else, is making sure that we get rid of our inner critic, which is full-on work. You have to watch every time that inner critic's telling you that there's something wrong with you and you're inferior, or you're not good enough, or you're ugly, or whatever. You just basically tell it to go away. I'm just looking at what June says here before I continue reading. She says, it's impossible to force emotional release no matter how much it is wanted or desired. Yes, so it's a process. And I think that what happened was, when I started reading this book in 2017, June, that it really woke me up to the reality of what had been going on for me, which then allowed me to really grieve and get angry about what had occurred, and realize that, you know, that I'm a beautiful soul and there's nothing wrong with me, and it's okay that I'm really peed off with the way I've been treated. And that is what has helped to bring me to another level in my being. The next bit, he says, healing the shame that binds us in loneliness. So I'm going to read this bit. And he says, I soon discovered, however, that my tears were as stuck as they had ever been, or at least since I was 6 years old, the last time I could remember crying. Further reading and researching then led me to seek help, and so ensued my baptism into therapy. Blessed by the great fortune of finding a good enough therapist on the first try. 51, 52, okay, 53. So you found a good therapist. So that's the other thing. I'm doing therapy at the moment. I'm in therapy until February 2020. I started in 2018, September, and I got therapy through my local doctors in London. And it's at a clinic which is absolutely fantastic. And to be able to verbally ventilate and really dig into my dreams and, you know, things, my life in general has really been, it's been profound for me. You know, there were times when I thought, why am I doing this? It's just taking me back to the past. But actually, it's been very therapeutic, on top of all of the books that I read as well and the research I do. So then he says, there was a milestone achieved for me, and it evolved into a long meandering journey of finding more relational help with an array of healers, therapists, therapeutic groups, and deeper friendships. These experiences range from extremely helpful to counter-therapeutic, but as time went on, they became increasingly helpful. A central aspect of the truly helpful relational work was done by John Bradshaw. So that's on Amazon, actually. You can get a guy called John Bradshaw, called Healing the Shame That Binds You. I actually got that book on Audible. It's on YouTube as well. If you just put in on YouTube, John Bradshaw, Healing the Shame That Binds You, there's some brilliant YouTubes on, and then the book as well, which, you know, the more information we've got, the easier it's going to be for us to heal. He says, I believe toxic shame cannot be healed without some relational help. Several therapists and groups aided me greatly to unbind from the shame that made me hide whenever I could not invoke my perfect persona. So what happens is that we think that we need to be perfect, and that if we're not perfect, that we're not going to be accepted or loved, or that we're faulty. And I can see that as I was treated, you know, in childhood, I brought that into my adulthood, and I'd stay away from people, and I'd have a persona that was not the real me. I'm more the real me with people. I'm not, you know, I'll say what I need to say, and I feel safe with the right people, of course. So he says, concurrently, I learned that real intimacy correlated with the amount I shared my vulnerabilities. So this is a good thing. We have to choose who we share our vulnerabilities with as well. You know, people have to earn our trust. We don't just, you know, trust anyone. I feel that, you know, I'm quite brave. I say I'm quite brave. I mean, I get on YouTube and I speak about this, but, you know, the real vulnerable stuff, I don't share the depths of it. You know, I'm look at this, it's very much the surface of what went on in my reality as a child. But clearly, you know, me speaking is going to help other people as well. He says here, as I increasingly practice emotional authenticity, the glacier of my lifelong loneliness began to melt. So when we have a few people that we can be authentic with and be ourselves with and not be afraid of, then we're going to begin to, he says, melt the glacier. So it's the part of us inside of us that's been frozen, or the shattered child, you know, the shattered soul is going to begin to recover and heal when we know that there are people that will hold our hand, and that people that do care about us, and there are authentic people in this world. And something else I have to say is that there are more good people in this world than messed up people. There's a lot of unpleasantries going on in the world, and that's reality as well. You know, there's some sexual abuses going on in churches, it's going on in children's homes, and abuses of children. There's abuse there was Hollywood, and then we had it also with the Epstein case recently. So we can't say that, you know, there are a selection of people in humanity who have got an evil aspect to them, unfortunately. And that is the reality. We've got trafficking and such. So we, you know, we have to be aware that we can't just say that everybody is good and life is, you know, positive for everybody, because it's not. And we have to speak up. In order to speaking up, we're going to be helping other people as well. We have no shame. This is to help heal others. So as I increasingly practice emotional authenticity, the glacier of my lifelong loneliness began to melt. He says, it is important to note here that groups can be even more powerful for the healing of shame than individual work. This is because there is typically more mutual vulnerability in a group than in individual work. Moreover, feeling compassion for someone who has suffered a similar thing to us naturally expands into feeling the same for ourselves. So, you know, I found that myself when I started speaking on YouTube, and in ladies group, I've got a group for ladies on anxiety and CPTSD on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook and find that link on my or message me on my page for the ladies out there. But I would say that the more I realized from 2 years ago when I began to speak up, that other women then stepped forward and said what had happened to them, I no longer felt alone in the world, and my shame began to dissipate, because I realized that, you know, I'm not alone. And he goes on to say, therapeutic relational experiences enhanced my self-compassion considerably further than what I was able to accomplish on my own. Moreover, I believe that insufficient self-compassion is the worst development arrest of all, and restored self-compassion is the keystone of all effective recovery. So I began to do my inner child work, and I really began to take care of my inner child. I had a friend helping me with that as well. He was saying some very therapeutic things that helped me to get in touch with my inner child. Let's see what June says here in the chat. She says, I'm learning that each person has a different healing, awakening path. Different therapies help different people. What works for you may not work for me. Must completely immerse self in many therapies. Yes, I agree with you. You know, there's no one way. And anybody that says there's just one way, and also it's not all or nothing. It's like with healing, you know, we might have days or weeks where we have a good period of time, and then we'll have a few days where we won't, because we'll get triggered by seeing something on the news or having to hear somebody's voice or interact with somebody that's just triggering us. And then June also says, the pain and isolation drives me. No groups on my that address trauma. I hope to start one eventually. That's a really good idea. You know, that will give you, empower you, and it will empower other people as well. June, I don't know, I've got a ladies group on Facebook as well, so you can join there. I'm very careful, you know, it really is just 100% ladies, that group. So for protection and the ability to be able to speak. This isn't about separation. This is about just, it was best for me because I'm helping mainly ladies with the parts side of this, the abuse of what's gone on in our lives. He goes on to say, in retrospect, I can clearly see that as my self-compassion increased, my toxic shame decreased. Modern advances in neuroscience, and he says here, see a general theory of love. I don't know if that's a book. Then he says, suggests that we are intrinsically limited in our ability to emotionally regulate and soothe ourselves. More and more research suggests that our ability to metabolize painful emotional states is enhanced by communicating with a safe enough other person. So we do need other people, you know, we do. And he says here about finding good enough relational help. He says in chapter 13 of the book, I provide guidance about how to shop for a good enough therapist. I also explore more deeply the principles of therapeutic relational healing to help you know what is reasonable to expect from your therapist. So anybody who's looking for a therapist out there, you can, you know, get the book. It's free on Amazon USA audio, and it's free on Kindle UK. So I'm going to read a little bit more of this section and then I'll be done for the day. So going on, he says, I have also met a number of survivors who have been lucky enough to get this kind of relational healing from a partner or a friend, typically one who has had good enough parents or who has a lot of recovery. Finally, attachment theorists have developed the concept of earned secure attachment to describe the recovered enough state where the attachment disorder of CPTSD becomes sufficiently healed. This is typically evidenced by the survivor forming at least one supportive and reliable enough relationship. So we have to, you know, we do get there with people eventually. Like I've got, you know, 3 people at the moment in my life that are, you know, supportive and reliable enough in relationship for me to continue my healing. The fact that I've been able to verbally ventilate to them, you know, about my abandonment, my childhood abandonment and my fears means that, you know, it's very honest relationships or friendships where I can say what I need to say, even when I feel vulnerable. And if I feel vulnerable, I know that I can push myself a bit to not feel vulnerable with these people that I know. And 3 people I've got. That's a good number. June says, I've read that one. Okay. Yes, start that group, June. You know, that's a beautiful thing to do to help others. If you find a space, you know, you might get a nice space where you can rent a room and begin to support others and put out a little ad in a newspaper or something. So, I mean, personally, I'm sticking to helping women in my group, but see how that works for you. It depends what you're really dealing with there. He goes on to say, many of the successful therapies I have guided come to an end when the client gains an earned secure relationship outside of our therapy. This is typically a partner or a best friend with whom the person can truly be themselves. So we have to know, we have to be able to truly be who we are with another person, one other. Another potential source of relational healing is the co-counseling relationship guidelines for creating a co-counseling relationship are also contained in chapter 13. So that's also on his webpage. So what I'm going to do is after this video, I will get that section and I'll post the link below the video so that you can, in the comments box below this video, so that you're able to access that and have a look. So what he suggests in that is that you have a friend, for instance, and then you have maybe a monthly meeting or a fortnightly meeting or a weekly, where you allow each to verbally ventilate for 15 minutes, you share, but you listen, you don't butt in, and you don't you know, try and fix anything. You just sit there and listen for 15 minutes, for instance, and then you'll do the same for the other if they need that. And that way we can begin to heal. Because not everybody can afford therapy, and some, you know, waiting lists, even in the UK, like to get on the doctor's list is, you know, it means that there's a waiting list. So it means, what do we do in the meantime? And there are groups on Facebook that are helpful as well, and people that you can connect with. But be safe, and, you know, just build trust with people. So then he goes on, many respondents to my webpage, his webpage, have reported glowingly about the help they get from others through online recovery groups and forums. These groups can be particularly helpful for those who still find it difficult to be vulnerable in person. Sometimes the distance and relative anonymity of these forums can decrease the fear of self-disclosure. And this in turn can enhance therapeutic relating. An increasing number of therapists also seem to be offering telephone sessions for this same reason. The section Find in an Online Group, and again in chapter 13 of this book, but I'm reading chapter 3 at the moment. So I think that's it for today. I thought I'd pop on and just put some help out, or some advice, not advice, help out there for tonight. And I'll probably be back in a couple of days with something else. And if you know, want to pop over to Facebook and find me over there, or you can also, you know, leave comments in the box or send me an email as well. Okay, I want to thank you for watching, whoever's watching. Thank you to Ronfano. Thank you for your comments. You know, really great that you join me in each video. And June, thank you as well. And I'll be back in a couple of days. Catch you later. Have a lovely weekend ahead of you. Thank you.